The moment $1.2 million vanished from Enron's books, everything shifted. At 3 a.m., in a dim-lit Houston office, Auditor Catherine Garfinkel stared at a spreadsheet that simply wouldn't add up. "How could a company that seemed untouchable disappear overnight?" she whispered, eyes flicking to the red-inked line that concealed billions in off-balance sheet entities. The phone rang, an anonymous teepster demanding a meeting. By morning, the headline screamed, "Enron Co. in bankruptcy." The fallout hit fast, the questions kept coming, and the stakes. Billions of investor dollars, shattered careers, and a shaken confidence in the very numbers that drive market moves. Garfinkel's find wasn't just a one-off glitch. It sparked a firestorm of scrutiny across Wall Street, pulling back the curtain on a hidden web of deceit that had long festered behind glossy annual reports. "The numbers don't lie unless they're being told to," she later told a congressional panel, a line that still echoes in boardrooms today. "I've spent a decade digging through ledgers, court filings, and whistleblower testimonies, chasing the truth behind the headlines." The SEC's own investigation would later confirm that Enron's financial statements were found to be fraudulent source. Corporate accounting scandals aren't rare footnotes, they're recurring chapters in today's business story. Over the past 3 decades, a string of high-profile collapses has shown a pattern: firms inflating earnings, hiding debt, and misleading investors, all to keep up a facade of growth. Think of WorldCom, once a telecom titan that fell apart after auditors uncovered massive revenue overstatements. Or Lehman Brothers, whose hidden liabilities and creative accounting sparked the 2008 financial crisis. The exact numbers stay out of this script, but the impact was crystal clear. Markets shuttered, jobs vanished, and public trust eroded. These cases underline a bigger truth. The lure to manipulate financial data is a systemic risk that can ripple through economies and destabilize whole sectors. WorldCom, a telecommunications giant whose accounting irregularities revealed inflated earnings, leading to one of the largest bankruptcies in U.S. history. Lehman Brothers, the investment bank that used off-balance sheet entities to conceal debt, triggering a global financial panic when the truth emerged. Tyco International, executives siphoned millions through fraudulent expense reports, prompting a dramatic corporate governance overhaul. Each story shares a common thread: the exploitation of accounting standards to paint a rosier picture than reality allowed. Among them, Enron's collapse stands as a watershed moment, not just for its size, but for the seismic shift it forced on regulatory frameworks. The company's use of special-purpose entities, complex off-balance sheet vehicles, let it hide debt and inflate profits, creating an illusion of relentless growth. When the truth finally surfaced, it set off a cascade of legal actions, investor lawsuits, and, crucially, a legislative response unlike any before. The fallout spurred the Sarbanes Oxley Act, a sweeping reform designed to tighten corporate accountability, boost financial disclosures, and shield investors from future deceptions. Source: the law introduced strict internal controls, forced CEOs and CFOs to certify the accuracy of their statements, and gave the SEC broader enforcement powers. Courts moved quickly against Enron's leadership. Former executives faced convictions for fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading, underscoring the personal consequences of corporate misconduct. Source: beyond the courtroom, the scandal reshaped how companies report to regulators. The SEC now requires rigorous filing of financial statements through its EDGAR system, ensuring greater transparency and accessibility for investors and analysts alike. Source: the ripple effect reached the media, with investigative journalism exposing layers of deceit that would have otherwise stayed hidden. The New York Times chronicled how the Enron debacle catalyzed sweeping changes in accounting regulations, reinforcing the need for vigilant oversight. Source: today, Enron's lessons echo in boardrooms, audit committees, and regulatory chambers. Companies now face stricter compliance regimes, investors demand higher transparency, and auditors apply more skeptical scrutiny to financial disclosures. Yet the core challenge remains, balancing the drive for profit with the ethical imperative to report honestly. As we peel back the layers of corporate accounting scandals, one question still hangs in the air. What will the next revelation look like? And how will the market react when another $1.2 million disappears? Stay tuned as we trace the trail from Enron's collapse to the modern safeguards that aim to keep corporate fraud in check. Enron's ascent kicked off in the mid-90s, when this Houston-based energy outfit ditched its old-school pipeline gigs and jumped headfirst into everything from deregulated power markets to broadband schemes and downright wild financial bets. The suits at the top kept shouting about this shiny new asset-light profit model, and wouldn't you know it, the stock price shot up like a bottle rocket. But if you peeled back the press release glitter, you'd find Enron's accounting squad, spearheaded by CFO Andrew Fastow, spinning up a tangled mess of off-balance sheet setups they called special purpose vehicles, or SPVs. These shell companies would scoop up Enron's dogs of assets, booking M as sales while sweeping the debt under the rug. Turns out, the whole charade was just a merry-go-round of fake loans, juicing earnings while hiding the fact that cash was actually hemorrhaging. Source. And it wasn't just a one-off trick. Oh no, it snowballed into full-blown corporate sleight of hand. Traders, under the watchful eyes of ex-CEO Ken Lay and ex-President Jeff Skilling, pushed this aggressive mark-to-market accounting nonsense. Every single contract, no matter how pie in the sky, got slapped with an instant profit based on some wild guess of future value. Auditors didn't stand a chance, because hey, the numbers were framed as educated guesses, not cold hard facts. Source. By the time the reported revenue hit the stratosphere, we're talking billions in a single year. Wall Street's cheer squad was calling Enron the crown jewel of innovation. Shares that barely scraped $10 in the early 90s were flirting with $90 by 2000, luring in hordes of institutional investors. But all that upward glide hit a ticking time bomb. Internal controls, deliberately gutted. Senior brass straight up told finance folks to see how far they could stretch the rules, turning risky reporting into the new normal. Source. Then came the moment everything imploded late 2001, when a routine SEC filing blew the lid off. Submitted through the Edgar system, the paperwork spilled the beans. Enron had buried billions in debt inside those SPVs, making their squeaky clean balance sheets look like a bad Photoshop job. Source. Within days, credit agencies dropped Enron like a hot potato, and the stock nosedived from its lofty heights all the way to less than $1 per share. Confidence vaporized, liquidity vanished, and the company flatlined. Justice moved fast and furious. Federal prosecutors, armed with the SEC's damning dossier, slapped securities fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading charges on the big names. When the trials rolled around, Lay, Skilling, and Fastow each walked away with sentences ranging from a decade to over 20 years, proof that the big bosses weren't getting off scot-free. Source. But the fallout stretched way beyond prison time. Congress fired up the Sarbanes Oxley Act, a regulatory sledgehammer that reinvented corporate governance overnight. CEOs and CFOs now had to personally sign off on every quarterly and yearly report, and the new Public Company Accounting Oversight Board kept auditors on a tighter leash. The bill got signed into law in 2002, game over for the old trust us days. Source. The accounting world felt the tremors too. Firms that once swore loyalty to clients suddenly had to play by new independence rules. No more moonlighting as consultants while auditing the same books. The SEC, riding Sarbanes Oxley's coattails, turned up the heat, doling out fines and settlements that racked up in the billions over the next few years. The source: business schools took notes too. Case studies now dissect Enron's SPV shell game, the mark-to-market voodoo, and the brutal pressure on employees to hit unattainable earnings targets. The takeaway: unchecked ambition and murky books can torch even the biggest empires. Transparency isn't optional anymore. Post-Enron, investors got a serious case of skepticism when profits looked too shiny to be real. They started demanding deeper disclosures, clearer audit trails, and zero tolerance for financial sleight of hand. Thanks to Sarbanes Oxley's safeguards, companies now pay a premium for complexity, higher borrowing costs, tighter scrutiny, and the ever-looming threat of regulators knocking on the door. Source: Enron's crash wasn't just a footnote, it was a full-blown earthquake. One company's accounting acrobatics didn't just sink a $60 billion empire, it forced an entire industry to stare down its flaws. The reforms that followed weren't perfect, but they did tighten the screws on financial reporting and hand regulators a roadmap for holding the powerful accountable. As we dig into Enron's wild ride, the lesson sticks: trust has to be earned, not faked. Enron's downfall was more than a corporate bust. It forced a complete rewrite of accounting's rulebook. Prior to 2001, the finance arena ran on a framework that let deceit sit right out in the open. Then, when Enron's house of cards collapsed, those same cracks turned into glaring, unavoidable flaws. What came next went beyond simple reform. It sparked a seismic shift, reshaping forever how corporations, regulators, and investors deal with each other. First up, the most immediate fallout: the Sarbanes Oxley Act. Signed in 2002, this landmark law was not merely a reaction, it demanded accountability. Source: the act rolled out sweeping reforms, tightening auditor oversight and imposing criminal penalties on executives who approved fraudulent statements. Now, for the first time, CEOs and CFOs must personally vouch for their firm's financial reports or risk jail time. Beat TechSpot. Prior to Enron, this level of accountability was a rarity. Afterward, it turned into the new norm. Still, Sarbanes-Oxley wasn't solely about punishment. Its core aim was to rebuild trust by demanding transparency. A standout provision, Section 404, forced firms to document and test internal financial controls. All of a sudden, the black boxes of corporate finance were dragged into the light. Auditors could no longer just rubber stamp reports. They had to check each step. Source: for investors, this was radical, a chance to see the real numbers instead of those cooked up behind closed doors. That transparency didn't stop at legislation. It seeped right into the culture of corporate reporting. Earnings calls stopped feeling like theater. Analysts stopped accepting management statements at face value. Source: the financial press, once complicit in Enron's hype, now eyes every quarterly report with healthy skepticism. The mantra "trust but verify" quietly became Wall Street's unofficial credo. But laws and scrutiny alone couldn't patch the damage Enron caused. The scandal uncovered a deeper rot, baked-in conflicts of interest within the accounting world. Firms such as Arthur Andersen acted not only as auditors but also as consultants. They raked in millions by selling creative accounting tricks to the very firms they were meant to police. When Enron collapsed, that conflict became unmistakable. Beat Zoom. Arthur Andersen, once a Big Five giant, faced a 2002 conviction for obstruction of justice. That ruling wasn't merely a death sentence for the firm. It broadcast a clear message: auditors could no longer serve two masters. The fallout reshaped the whole accounting landscape. By 2003, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board (PCAOB) emerged, a new watchdog born from Sarbanes-Oxley to supervise auditors and enforce ethics. Source: for the first time, the profession gained an independent body guaranteeing that financial statements weren't merely polished lies. Simply having the PCAOB shifted the firm calculus comply or brace for consequences. Yet the true test of Enron's legacy lay not in the statutes or the convicted firms. It lived in the everyday practices that shifted. Companies started reshaping boards, inserting independent directors to dilute insider power. Audit committees, once merely ceremonial, now wield real teeth. Shareholders now wield greater power to challenge management. Zors. Even the language of financial reporting has evolved. Footnotes, formerly obscure and ignored, now brim with warnings. Investors learn to read between the lines, or at least to ask tougher questions. Beat visual, this shift went beyond mere bureaucracy. It was cultural, too. Before Enron, corporate lies to investors were brushed off as an unfortunate but inevitable risk. After, it became a systemic failure demanding systemic solutions. The scandal forced a reckoning with the notion that markets could self-regulate. Spoiler alert, they couldn't. The ripple effects stretched far beyond accounting. Enron's downfall sparked a wave of corporate collapses, from WorldCom to Tyco, each peeling back fresh layers of fraud. Yet each also reinforced a lesson. When trust erodes, regulation follows. Source. Courts turned into a stage for accountability. Executives such as Jeffrey Skilling and Andrew Fastow earned decades behind bars, not for being poor businessmen, but for breaking laws in ways Enron made impossible to ignore. Yet despite all progress, the system's flaws lingered. Enron's ghost still haunts today's financial reporting. The 2008 crisis showed that even tighter rules can't stop recklessness from thriving. Still, Enron's lessons endured. The push for transparency didn't die with the bankruptcy. It simply evolved. Beat tonal, what Enron altered wasn't merely accounting for money, it reshaped how we view honesty in business. The scandal proved that without accountability, markets don't just falter, they fail. And once trust shatters, rebuilding it takes more than fresh laws. It demands a fundamental cultural shift. That culture now expects more than mere compliance. It calls for vigilance. Investors, regulators, and even employees now serve as the first line of fraud defense. The era of blind faith in corporate reporting has ended. Beat Texpop Enron didn't just tweak accounting, it reshaped the bond between companies and their stakeholders. The question now isn't if fraud will happen, it's whether we'll catch it in time. And thanks to Enron, we now have better tools to do just that. Enron's collapse isn't just a headline, it's a warning glass that still bounces back in today's boardrooms. When regulators discovered Enron's financial statements were outright fraudulent, the shockwaves surged through every corner of finance. Source. That instant made investors, auditors, and CEOs ask a blunt, unrelenting question. How did that lie slip past the safeguards meant to shield us? The New York Times tracked how the scandal sparked major shifts in corporate accounting rules, reshaping the very language of financial disclosure. Source. Those reforms, impressive as they are, need ongoing, active oversight. In reaction, Congress rolled out the Sarbanes Oxley Act, a legislative shield aimed at stopping a repeat of that betrayal. Source. The law added tighter internal controls, held executives personally accountable, and slapped harsher penalties on misreporting. But a statute by itself can't assure integrity. It's the everyday practice of transparency, deep audits, protected whistleblowers, alert shareholders, that gives any law its pulse. Court records reveal former Enron execs were convicted of assorted crimes tied to the scandal, sending a loud message that deception has personal consequences. Source. Those convictions remind us that accountability can be enforced, even up at the highest echelons of power. These days, every public firm files its financial statements with the SEC, a routine that looks dull on the surface. Source. Each filing, though, serves as a litmus test of honesty, a snapshot investors and regulators scan for hidden risk. The routine nature of these reports should sharpen, not lull, our vigilance. Looking back at these lessons, we see the fight for ethical finance is still on. Transparency is a habit, not a one-off fix. It asks each of us CFOs, board members, analysts, or everyday investors to nurture a skeptical mindset, fire probing questions, and reject surface-level answers. So, what can we actually do right now? First up, push for real-time disclosure wherever you can and back policies that boost auditor independence. Second, champion a culture that celebrates raising concerns instead of punishing them. Finally, wield your voice as a shareholder or consumer to hold firms accountable, insisting they meet the standards born after Enron's collapse. Enron's legacy reminds us vigilance isn't optional, it's the price of trust. Embedding transparency in every decision honors the victims of the past and safeguards the market's future. Let's act today, because the next scandal won't wait for us to hesitate.